My dad was secretly living a double life, and when I found out, I couldn't keep it to myself. I exposed him to my mum, who immediately forced him to take us to confront his second family. The day my life fell apart began with a simple act of kindness. My dad was heading out for work one morning, visibly upset that no one had made him lunch. Since it was my day off, I decided to surprise him. I cooked his favorite meal and took it to his office. But as I waited in the lobby, I saw something that shattered my world. The door to his office opened, and out walked a woman with 2 kids I didn't recognize, followed by my dad. One of the children called him Daddy. My heart stopped as I quickly hid behind a corner. I followed them outside to the parking lot, where I saw my dad hug and kiss the woman and then lift the kids in his arms, kissing their foreheads. It was then I realized that my father had a secret family. I wanted to storm back into his office and confront him in front of everyone, demanding an explanation. But I held back, thinking it wouldn't be fair. I returned home, locked myself in my room, and tried to process what I had just witnessed. Questions swirled in my mind. How could my dad do this? How could he have another family? Time seemed to blur as I waited for him to return home that night. When he finally walked through the door, I knew I had to confront him. My mum was out, so it was just the 2 of us. He came in, smiling, and asked how my day was. I looked him straight in the eyes and asked, "Who are they?" His smile vanished, and he looked at me like a deer caught in headlights. He tried to play dumb, asking what I was talking about, but I could see the panic in his eyes. I wasn't playing games. I repeated my question, asking him who the woman and the kids were. He just stood there, staring at me, trying to think of something to say. Before he could, I pressed on. I told him I had seen him with them, heard the little girl call him Daddy, and saw him kiss and hug their mum. Again I asked, who were they? He knew he was caught. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he sighed and said, "It's not what you think, but how could it not be? What else could it be when a child calls you Daddy and you're hugging and kissing their mum?" I wasn't playing games. I repeated my question, asking him who the woman and the kids were. He just stood there, staring at me, trying to think of something to say. Before he could, I pressed on. I told him I had seen him with them, heard the little girl call him Daddy, and saw him kiss and hug their mum. Again I asked, who were they? He knew he was caught. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he sighed and said, "It's not what you think, but how could it not be? What else could it be when a child calls you Daddy and you're hugging and kissing their mum?" I wasn't buying it. I demanded to know what was really going on. I accused him of having another family and being a liar. He tried to calm me down, saying it was complicated and that I didn't understand. But I didn't care about any of that. I wanted the truth. I kept pushing until he finally admitted it. Yes, he had another family. He had been seeing this woman for a few years, and they had 2 kids together, a little girl and a 20-year-old son with severe cerebral palsy. He said he never wanted it to go this far, but now found himself in too deep and didn't know how to get out. I was devastated. My dad had been living a double life for so long. To be fair, he managed to hide it for a very long time, so in a weird way, I had to give it to him. But there was no way I could forgive him. What's even worse is that he started begging me not to tell my mum. He said it would destroy her and tear our family apart. He even tried to bribe me with money, saying he'd buy me anything I wanted if I just kept quiet. At first, I was determined to tell Mum, but that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad with his other family, laughing and smiling like they were his whole world. A question kept coming back to me: what would happen if I didn't tell Mum? If I kept quiet, she would never know. She could go on living her life, unaware of the double life her husband was leading. She'd still smile when he walked through the door, still laugh at his jokes, and still believe in the love they had built over the last 20 years. I knew how much she loved him. I saw it every day of my life, the way her face lit up when he came home, the way she leaned into his touch, and the way she talked about him to her friends during girls' night in. And I knew how much she trusted him. She never doubted him, never questioned where he was or what he was doing. If I told her the truth, all of that would be destroyed. I'd be the one to shatter the perfect picture she had of their marriage, and honestly, that was a heavy burden to bear. I wrestled with the thought of whether it was right for me to be the one to take that away from her. The thought of seeing the pain in her eyes, the idea of tears streaming down her face, made my heart ache. I knew it would devastate her. I didn't know if I would be selfish in telling her or not, but then another thought crept in, one I couldn't ignore. If I didn't tell her, what kind of person would that make me? Could I really look her in the eyes day after day, knowing what I knew? Could I pretend everything was fine when it was far from it? If I didn't tell her, my dad would just keep living this double life, lying to both of us, betraying both of us. And if Mum found out on her own, the betrayal would be even worse knowing that I knew and didn't say anything. I couldn't live with myself if I kept this from her. She deserved the truth, no matter how painful it was. After I knew my dad was asleep, I took his phone. I knew his passcode, and I started going through his messages. Sure enough, I found texts between him and this woman. They talked about how much they missed each other and loved their kids. Among the pictures of our family were dozens of photos of him with the other woman and her kids. I clicked on the first one. They had gone to Disney World together. I checked the date. It was during a week when Dad had told us he was on a big work trip. Now I knew exactly where he was. They were all smiling, standing in front of Cinderella's castle. The kids were wearing Mickey Mouse ears, and the woman had her arm wrapped around my dad. In another photo, the little girl was on his shoulders, laughing as they watched a parade go by. There was a picture of them on the teacup ride, and another of them holding giant stuffed animals, clearly having the time of their lives. I stared at the screen as tears welled up in my eyes. Disney World was the one place I had begged him to take us, year after year. Every time he'd given the same excuses, like we didn't have enough money, or maybe next year when things calmed down at work. I had believed him. I had accepted it, thinking that maybe one day we'd finally get to go, just like all my friends had. But that day never came, and now I knew why. I was 18 and had never been to Disney World, while he had taken his other daughter, who looked no more than 2. He had chosen them over us. The tears fell as I kept scrolling, unable to stop myself from imagining what that trip must have been like. I wondered if he ever thought of us while he was there, if he ever felt guilty when his other daughter called him Daddy as they walked through the park. Did he ever regret not taking me instead? But those thoughts only made me angrier. Clearly he hadn't regretted it enough to change his behavior. He had kept it up, living this double life, taking them on the trip I had always wanted, while telling me and my mum that we just had to wait, that maybe someday we'd get to go. But someday never came, and now I knew why. I took screenshots of everything and saved them on my phone because I knew I needed proof when I talked to my mum. The next morning when she woke up, I sat her down at the kitchen table and told her everything. I showed her the screenshots, and she just broke down. She cried, asked me how long this had been going on, and asked me why he would do this. I didn't have any answers for her. I was just as shocked and hurt as she was. But she was strong. After a while, she stopped crying and told me that we were going to confront him together. She said he needed to face the consequences of his actions, and she wanted me by her side when she did it. That night, when my dad came home, we were waiting for him. My mum didn't waste any time. She looked him in the eye and told him to tell her the truth about the other family. He tried to deny it at first, but we both knew he was lying. So my mum showed him the screenshots, and he finally broke down. He admitted everything: how he met this woman, how he started seeing her, and how it eventually led to them having kids together. He said he never wanted to hurt us, but he didn't know how to stop. He spoke about the early days of his marriage, how he was young and overwhelmed by the responsibilities of starting a family. The pressure of establishing himself in his career had taken a toll on him. It was at a work conference early in their marriage that he met her, Jessica. She was everything he felt he wasn't at the time: carefree and fun. What started as innocent conversations soon grew into something more. At first, he convinced himself it was just a fling, but that was a lie, he told himself. Once he started, it snowballed. Years passed, and the affair grew deeper and more complicated. Jessica got pregnant, and suddenly it wasn't just about him and her anymore. He tried to rationalize it by saying he was caught up and couldn't find a way out without destroying everything. My mum and I sat there, absorbing the reality of his words. At that moment, I knew that the life we had before was over. My mum knew it too, and my dad sat there, broken by the weight of his own choices. I was so angry, but I was also heartbroken. I told him that he needed to tell the other woman the truth that she needed to know about us. He said she didn't know anything about us, that she thought he was single because he never told her he was married. So we made him set up a time for all of us to meet. We told him that we were going to meet this other woman and he was going to tell her the truth. He tried to talk us out of it, but we weren't backing down. He had lied enough, it was time for the truth to come out. The next day, we drove to a park where my dad had arranged to meet her. My mum and I were in the car, watching as he walked up to the woman and the kids. He was holding the little girl, and she was laughing as he played with her. It broke my heart to see it because she had no idea what was about to happen. When we got out of the car and walked over to them, the woman looked confused. She asked my dad who we were, and he just looked at the ground. My mum didn't waste any time. She told the woman who we were and what was going on. The woman was in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, but she remained calm. She looked at my dad, asking him if it was true, and he just nodded. She didn't cry, though she just stood there trying to process everything. Then she said something that shocked us both. She told my dad that if he wanted to stay with her and their kids, she'd accept him as her boyfriend. My mum and I were both stunned. How could she be okay with this? But it turns out she already had some suspicions. She knew something wasn't right, but she didn't want to believe it. She said she'd stay with him because she loved him and their kids, but she didn't expect anything more from him. My mum was done at that point. She looked at my dad and said she was filing for a divorce, and that was it. We left the park, and my dad stayed behind with his other family. I haven't seen my dad much after that, except in court.